You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. We're joined with our regular visitor, Dave Hale, from the Sheppey Horticultural Society this evening. Dave, as always, it's great to see you here.
I think that tune you've just played by Mud is very appropriate given the amount of wet we've had recently, Daniel.
Well, yeah, I suppose it is, yeah.
Honestly, we didn't plan it, did we?
No, we didn't.
It's delightful to be here again. Thank you for inviting us yet again. It's very kind of you to do it.
Well, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of an introduction all about yourselves at the Sheppey Horticultural Society.
Well, the society is based on two sites on the island, both of which are in Sheerness. One of the sites is at Medway Road. There's about 90 plots there, 90 plots, 90 members currently cultivating an allotment of all different sizes. On the second site, which is at Richmond Street, Nursery Close, we've got about 95 or so plot holders. Overall, though, we currently number a society membership of about 220 odd, actually, people. I'm never quite sure when, because people come in. We had new members signing up yesterday morning, so it jumped from 220 to about 223 when people actually came in on a Sunday. As you well know, Sunday is social day, and that's when people come down. So not all our members, obviously, if anybody's doing the arithmetic, not all the members cultivate an allotment. And for a nominal joining fee, you can still be a member without holding a plot. There are advantages in being a member, as at both sites we do run shops, which you've seen, obviously. We're able to give appreciable discounts, all manner of gardening items and wares, seeds, plants. The next big order that we're coming in with is potatoes. People are ordering their potatoes. Fertilisers, compost tools, pots, trays, all of those kinds of things which you would associate with a horticultural society. What comes free is the gardening banter and discussion, which you've experienced yourself, obviously.
Yeah.
Welcoming bunch of people of all ages. And the last thing, actually, in this introduction is being a member also entitles you to go into our annual show, the two-day show which we hold in August, late August. Competition's friendly, and there are no big prizes to be won, but the kudos of getting that little certificate, which you've seen, obviously, which actually says first prize ticket. Priceless, absolutely priceless. So that's who we are and that's where we are. Two sites, Medway Road and Richmond Street, Nursery Close.
Are there any plants you could be planting at the time of year?
Yeah, you might think November, early December is completely the wrong type of year, wrong type of climate within the year.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking that.
A lot of people generally tend to do that, but it's a good bulb planting time, actually, tulip planting, and it can in fact with tulips go on to about the middle of January, but be prepared for them to flower later, early next season, i.e. later spring than earlier spring. They need a sunny spot where the soil's free draining and it's not too heavy, which I think is something we will come on to a little bit later this evening, actually, talking about water lying around, actually. So the soil is free draining, not too heavy. Plant them at about 3 times the depth of the bulb. Generally, planting bulbs at that depth encourages them to flower the following year, certainly where narcissus are concerned. They need to be deeper. You often see them where you can buy them in pots and you can see the actual bulb sticking out of the pot. They really need to be deeper if you're going to take them from the pot and put them into the ground for any following year. On the vegetable side, there's quite a few varieties that can be planted this side of Christmas and the New Year. Broad beans you can plant now. Now, I know they're not everybody's taste, but when there's very little else around, broad beans early next year, having overwintered, they are quite hardy plants. Mine are just starting to peak up. Just see the tips coming through, actually. You think, how on earth does a plant actually grow at this time of the year with this kind of weather system that's with us at the moment? Planting now then can give them the advantage of getting away earlier next spring, with the result that you get, as I said, an earlier crop. And again, when there's not much else around. A lot of people will have seen that, overwintering onions and shallots can also be planted now. And if you like garlic, and I'm not saying it's to everybody's taste, but we eat an awful lot more than we used to. Our food styles have changed. You probably would have noticed that. But if you do like garlic, that can also be put in at this time of the year, as it needs a period of cold weather to help it grow in the spring. I've heard of people actually putting their garlic in the fridge just to start it off. Don't freeze it, obviously, but to put it into the fridge gives it that cold spell that it actually does need. There's nothing to stop you growing winter salad vegetables under cover in pots and trays to supplement salad bowl. A lot of people will still be growing those kinds of lettuces and what have you, the overwintering lettuces. Two plants actually come to mind. If anybody's travelling around a garden centre at this particular time of the year, you will notice that, forgetting Christmas, which will come up, with poinsettias and what have you, but things like cyclamen, very colourful at this time of the year, white, pink, deeper red, and a plant which I actually grow in my garden called leucojum, which looks very much like a large snowdrop and will delight you. It suddenly appears looking like a large snowdrop, little white drooping flowers, and it's very, very hardy. So yeah, there are lots of things that you can actually put into the ground now. So it's not the dead period that people think perhaps it is.
Dave, if you are planning to go out in the garden or the allotment over the next couple of weeks or at the weekend, what kind of things can you be getting on with?
I think it's a time you can take stock generally, see the shape of your garden. The leaves are largely off the trees now, although they seem to have been hanging on recently. But the leaves have finally gone, so you can actually see the shape of your garden. It's very much a time, I think, for repair men, clearing away any rubbish that may have escaped your notice, or like me, been hidden away at the bottom of the garden, and you feel that you've got to finally get rid of all this detritus which you've plonked at the bottom of the garden to keep it out of the way. Out of sight, out of mind, I think. If you've got a greenhouse, then cleaning up, wiping down the glass, repairing any broken panels, because the frost on the weather does get into a broken panel in the greenhouse. I've got one that I need to repair on my greenhouse, actually. It's also, I think, still time for pruning established bushes, trees, while they're dormant. They're now becoming dormant. It's the best time to do them. Get rid of any broken, diseased branches, as well as spindly stems, those that are crossing or growing inwards, so that you get more light to the centre of established plants. If you've got either or both growing in your garden, you can prune grapevines now and climbing roses. The grapevines seem to have dropped all their leaves. They're absolutely everywhere again in my garden. I've got one which is outside. I just let it grow rampant because it feeds the birds later in the year. But it's time now to look at the pattern and the shape of it, because it will have grown exponentially and I wouldn't necessarily have noticed it. Equally, check, cut back, pull off where necessary those climbers that have attached themselves to their house. Ivy, of course, is the big one to take account of. Although it's not strictly gardening, it's more DIY, I suppose, actually. Now that we've had the wind and the leaves are down, I think it's time to get out the ladder, prune and check, check the gutters and the downpipes, and use the leaves that you actually find as a mulch in the garden. Don't necessarily just sweep them up and put them into bags or tidy them away somewhere. Use them as a mulch, because the worms will take them down anyway. And this is where everybody says later in the year, where did all the leaves go to? It's because the thousands and thousands of worms have pulled them voluntarily into the earth. And it's a good thing because it helps to aerate the ground. And if you're going to have a bonfire, just make absolutely sure that nothing's using it for hibernation purposes. I'm talking specifically hedgehogs, slow worms, frogs and toads, all of those kinds of animals and invertebrates that are useful in the garden. So there's a lot that you can actually be getting on with in the next week or so.
Lots of useful tips as well. And that was the next question I was going to ask you, Dave. Do you have any useful tips for the time of year?
I think, well, there's a whole list, in fact, and it follows on from the previous question. What can you be doing over the next week or so, on perhaps the next month or so, or whatever. It's this period of time. Obviously, there's things like insulating, covering the ground with straw or leaf mulch, where you've got it. I mentioned just now, if you're sweeping up the leaves, put them as a mulch around your established plants. important this time of the year actually is to dig up and store those plants which ain't frost hardy. Things like dahlias. I've just put my fuchsias away, which have been merrily flowering away almost totally out of season, but now they're finally coming to the end. They are sort of dying back, and I need to put them into the greenhouse. I've just actually put them into the greenhouse. I've just dug the dahlias up in the from the garden in the pots where I've kept them, and now I'm starting to dry them out and store them. Things like that. Olive bushes, for instance, they need a bit of protection. Citrus. I've probably mentioned this before, 2 lemon trees which will go back into the greenhouse. They've been out all summer. Now they're going to go back into the greenhouse. Having said that, there are larger plants in the garden which are less hardy. So insulating plants too big to remove with insulating materials such as horticultural fleece, straw, carpet, curtaining. I would hesitate to use plastic around plants actually, because there is this problem. You could get moisture inside the plant and you wouldn't necessarily know that the plant is actually rotting from inside, using things which are porous but which provide some kind of protection. As bringing plants into a conservatory, particularly lemons or other citrus plants. Because with those, for instance, if they're in the warm, they will continue to flower throughout the winter. Mine does in the conservatory, actually, and the smell of a lemon in the middle of winter is quite something to believe. It really is superb. So, yeah, insulating the ground, flower beds, insulating your plants. Don't use plastic, as I say, because of the moisture which can be trapped. Feed the birds. Very important. I noticed that the starlings are back in my garden, and the robins and blackbirds do not like it at all, actually. But they're important. They are your friends, because they obviously will be taking those insects and those harmful insects that you don't want to see come next spring. So, yeah, take heed of warnings from the weather people as well. They're very important, actually, to listen to the weather forecast. There's nothing worse than getting caught in a cold snap. I know we've all listened to the weathermen and said, oh no, not again, please say something cheerful. But at this time of the year, it's well worth listening to them. Insulating the ground, flower beds, all of those kinds of things which you can be getting on with, and all of those kinds of tips. Digging up, placing plants in a cold greenhouse if you have one. The list is almost endless, Daniel, in fact, yeah.
Yeah, and talking about that, I was just thinking that our rhubarb plant, it's got, those sort of lovely leaves and stems, but now we're coming into the cold winter. Is that something you need to protect from frosts?
Rhubarb is pretty frost hardy, actually. It's this vegetable which we use as a fruit. It's quite an amazing plant, actually. All varieties, they develop a deep root system, and they grow best in a fertile, partially shaded, free-draining soil, and I think that's important. And in order to keep the plants healthy, it should be divided every 5 or 6 years, but it's hardy enough for it to stand on it in its own right. We were talking earlier, before we came on air this evening, about actually mulching or providing material around it. Don't cover the crowns of the rhubarb, because there is the danger of it actually rotting from inside out. Actually cover the ground around it. It doesn't like weed, for instance, around it. It likes to be splendidly isolated. And as something else, we did have a quiet laugh, actually, about it when we said, when you finally do divide after 3 to 5 years, make sure you've got between a gap of about 4 to 5 feet between the daughters, because sure as eggs is eggs, it will take over your garden in the end. And this is where you see people walking around disconsolately with roots saying, anybody like a rhubarb crown? And everybody says, I've already got 2 or 3 of them. So everybody's in the same boat, actually. But generally speaking, allow the rhubarb to establish itself for a year before taking your first harvest. So it needs to put roots down and build up the goodness from. It suffers from a few diseases. Crown rot's the main threat, particularly if the soil conditions are wet. And this is something we're talking about in a minute, actually. The conditions are wet. It likes firm but aerated, well-drained soil. It enjoys a period of cold to remain productive, so it's frost hardy in this country, actually. And a layer of mulch over the bed, once the ground freezes, that'll protect the roots from drying out. But mostly they're fine on their own. I've got 3 crowns on the allotment, actually, and they come up virtually every year. Can we go on to talk about forcing? It's something we were discussing, actually, that if you've got a rhubarb crown, it's to force one of the crowns or to force it for a period of time when it starts to grow. Exclude the light totally, it keeps it nice and warm, and I assure you the rhubarb tastes a heck of a sight sweeter. It looks pinker, and it will come up much quicker, but it will taste a heck of a sight sweeter. Some rhubarb can be quite astringent. Here it will be much sweeter and much more enjoyable with your evaporated milk or your custard or your ice cream. So, yeah, if anybody fancies actually forcing some rhubarb, there's no harm. I wouldn't suggest doing it every year because you can actually weaken the plant quite considerably. So, for a short period when it starts to grow, if you want a sweeter rhubarb, fine, try forcing, covering it with a cloche or covering it with something which will keep the warmth in. Try it, see what happens. Just a point, don't eat the leaves. They are poisonous. But opinion has changed over whether or not you can put the leaves on the compost heaps. A lot of people now do actually put the cut-off leaf onto their compost heap. We won't go into the pesticide that it will actually make at the moment. That's for another day, perhaps. But certainly rhubarb is a tough customer, and it should survive quite easily on its own by itself, with a little help here and there.
And Dave, we've had quite a bit of water about, so I was going to ask you about waterlogging, and I was thinking of bulbs as well, how that might be affecting those.
Oh, it's a problem in the field next door to me. Actually, you can see the rivers running down where the water has actually collected. So yes, it is a bit of a problem at this particular moment. It's still lying around in lots of the fields, as you've probably noticed on the island. But when the soil is waterlogged, plants literally drown. Would you believe? What happens is the water fills all of the air spaces between the soil particles, and what it does, it prevents oxygen from reaching the roots, and in turn that causes the soil to stagnate and prevents root growth. Obviously there's no other way that a plant can actually grow other than photosynthesis with the leaves. And plants may look like they need water, funnily enough. It's almost a reversal because the symptoms include yellowing leaves. What happens is they wither, drop off, and wilting of the plant may also occur. When you lift them, and this is where the bulbs come into it, we were talking about bulbs, the plant roots are black, soft, soggy, and the soil smells of rotten eggs. It's got that rotten egg smell attached to it, so it's a decidedly unhealthy area. Plant growth is studied. It's obviously happening after there's been prolonged rainfall, and we've had quite a lot of that recently. So the soil becomes waterlogged, and one of the effects, of course, and you probably have noticed this in your own garden, and certainly on the allotments, that people aren't walking on the ground at the moment. So if you walk on it, I'm not suggesting we drive over it in an allotment, but we still use machinery, which has wheels and sort of blades and what have you. So if you walk on it or drive over it, the soil becomes compacted, and literally and simply the drainage actually gets worse. Very often they will say, I keep off the grass I hesitate to call it a lawn, but I keep off the grass in my own garden simply because I'm compacting the soil. So soil turns to mud easily, and you get boggy lawns and you get boggy ground altogether, and it literally turns to mud. To try to solve the problem, it's essential that you don't walk on the wet soil because it aggravates the compaction. Dig up waterlogged plants in pots, remove damaged roots or damaged parts of roots, replant in fresh, important, free-draining compost or free-draining soil. Remove any dead or dying shoots, and we were talking about the wilting and the yellowing a little earlier. Spike lawns, for instance, with a motorised spiker. I've actually seen people walking around with 4-inch nails nailed in their boots or to a piece of wood underneath them. It works just as well, actually, but it can use a fork as well. You don't have to have expensive machinery to do it. In clay soil, and the island, of course, is predominantly clay, use plenty of organic matter, horticultural grit. That's something that somebody said to me yesterday, actually. Pea shingle, horticultural grit, or sharp sand. Just mix some of that into it because that helps to break up the soil, certainly where clay is concerned anyway. With free draining soil, we're talking about sandy soils, and I'm not suggesting we've got a lot of that on the island. You need to add organic matter to bulk up the soil, and it also adds nutrients, which in effect would be washed away by the amount of rain. A lot of people will put, quite a few allotmenteers will actually put fertilisers on their soil now. There really is no point to a great extent, simply because the rain will wash it all away. It needs, and it's not there when the plant actually needs it, when it starts growing in the springtime. So it's essential that you time the fertilisers and the goodness and the nutrient, putting it back in the soil at the appropriate time. If you've got boggy ground, that is not the time to actually do it. So you can see there's a lot that can actually be done to eradicate pooling of water. There's a lot of drastic action you can take as well. I'm not suggesting people should do this, but you can lay all kinds of pipes and what have you in your garden. No, I don't suspect that there are an awful lot of people will be doing that. Drastic action would mean, and I've got it written down here actually, I had to laugh or smile about it, dig ditches with gravel to drain the water away. Not a lot of people, not many people will want to be doing that, certainly not in the weather. But there's a lot of remedial action that you can actually take. Don't walk on it if you can help it. Provide a lot of nutrient for it. Dig them up if you have to. If you're growing bulbs in pots, for instance, lift them off the floor. Because if it's a waterlogged pot, it's a possibility you'll get frost. Not only will you break, because frost or because ice expands, water expands when it turns into ice, the pot could break and you'll lose the plant anyway. So lift it off the ground so that on feet, so that you actually get the air all around it. So there's quite a lot you can actually do. Apply pea shingle, sharp sand, all of those kinds of things. You can take remedial action. But I think the most important thing is keep off it. And I certainly do keep off my bed of grass, actually. Lots of things that can be done, certainly where waterlogging is concerned and wet weather. And we're likely to get more of that in the run-up to Christmas.
Dave, how much will an allotment plot cost to rent for the year?
We've managed, after discussion, we've managed to actually make sure that, or we've decided that the allotment rents and other fees will be held at the present level going into 2014. So for 2014, the charges remain for 10 rod allotments, the ground rent is £25, water rate £15, and society subscription, it's difficult to say that sometimes, of £1.50. So for a 10 rod allotment, it's a grand total of £41.50. It's not even £1 a week when you think about it, with 52 weeks in the year. And 5 rod allotments, ground rent £12.50, water rate £7.50, because you're not obviously not watering the same amount of area. Society subscription, I managed to get it out this time properly, £1.50 again, and that's a grand total of £21.50. And the cost per rod obviously works out at ground rent at £2.50 per rod. So 10 rods, total £41.50. 5 rods, total £21.50, which we think is absolutely excellent value for the amount of ground and the amount of produce that you can actually produce from a 5 rod allotment. You've seen them yourself, just how big they actually are. Having said that they're half the size of a big one. There's an awful lot that can still come out. So we think that is very good value for the money, less than £1 a week. And
Dave, before you go, I was just wondering if you could recommend to somebody who might be interested in becoming a member of the society or going on to rent their own allotment plot.
I think for some it's a family affair. I know that's a hackneyed phrase, but I think first of all you need to discuss it with your family, in effect. We've had people come up to us very recently. We've been in touch with them saying a plot has become available. How do you feel about taking it over? I'm doing it with my son, or I'm doing it with my daughter, or it's a family thing. The kids come as well. So yeah, involve the family wherever possible, wherever you can. Involve them in your plans. read up on the subject. What are your aims? What do you want to grow? How much time do you want to devote to the plot? As I've said before, you'd be surprised that allotmenteering isn't necessarily 24/7. Although there are some who plant by the light of the moon. Apparently, I'm not suggesting that we do that, but there are, there is this thought that planting by the moon, a few hours a week generally will suffice where allotmenteering is concerned. It's however much you want to put into it. For beginners, don't be too ambitious to start with. Develop your skills. And don't be afraid to ask for advice. So I still ask for a great deal of advice. I'm growing certain, dahlias. I've never grown dahlias in my life for the first time this year. The amount of advice that I've been asking, they must be thinking, this guy's in direct competition with us, in effect. But no, it's not like harking back to the show, obviously, that there is this competition. So, yeah, we never, no matter how developed a gardener you actually are, no matter how expert a gardener you are, you never stop learning about gardening. There's always something new to actually learn about. Best of all, though, and you've had this, it's you get to eat the fruits of your labours, don't you, Daniel?
Yeah.
Hopefully they were quite nice, but there you go.
Yeah, no, it was. It's always nice to eat something that's homegrown. So
yeah, exactly. Nice. Yeah, I wish you the best with your rhubarb, by the way. And take pride in what you've grown for the dinner table. And again, there's another angle to it as well. The exercise you put in is basically a free fitness and fresh air programme. Believe it or not, even though you're in the middle of a quite large town called Sheerness, there's time and space to switch off for a while. And you, again, I know I keep bringing in and asking you the question, but you've experienced that effect as well, haven't you, on a Sunday morning, sitting on that sunshine with literally, sorry, I'm becoming very poetic, the bees and the insects wandering around. You wouldn't think you were in Sheerness.
No, it's a nice, peaceful atmosphere. It almost feels almost a different sort of, I don't know how to describe it, a different time zone almost. You feel, there's more time to do something, which is nice.
Until the police siren interrupts going along the halfway road. But you would agree with me that there is a peaceful side to it, actually. Sunday's social day, people will sit and talk and banter. We get an awful lot of banter on the Sunday. It's when you catch up with everybody, put it that way. Okay, but as I say, if I may sort of just say to people how best to contact the Society, if that's okay with you. The Society's secretary, or our secretary, is Sue Underhill, and you can contact her on telephone number 01795, of course, 661 547. Now is actually perhaps a good time to get in touch with Sue, or get in touch with anybody, or come and visit us on a Sunday morning, which is the best day, it being social day, because the Society's year begins in January. Come along, pay us a visit, and if there is a plot which is available, that's the best time, because you get the full year in, rather than trying to take over a plot halfway through the year, or towards the end of the year. If you see what I mean. So you get the full annual, you get the 4 seasons, basically. So come along, visit, view to joining up, taking on an allotment for yourself. It's a great deal of fun. There's a little bit of exercise thrown in. It's free, of course. But so there you go. That's the best way of actually getting in touch with us.
Dave, as always, it's great to have you along with us. Thank you very much once again for coming along.
Again, it's delighted. We're delighted to come along and talk gardening and allotmenteering. I've enjoyed this evening's music mix, as I've said to you when the music was actually playing. You played all my songs tonight, Daniel. Thank you very much for that. Very enjoyable. And I know it's a little early, but we'd like to wish you and all your listeners a very Merry Christmas and a great gardening year in 2014. Hopefully, we won't get the weather systems that we've had this year.
Well, no, thank you for that. And, of course, I hope you have a good Christmas and New Year as well. And we'll see you in the new year, I'd imagine, next.
We hope so, very much. Thanks, Daniel.
That's Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society right here at BRFM 95.6 this evening.